Hello again. Thank you very much for joining. You are joining the Property Experts podcast live at 5 p.m. every Friday. It's just myself. Ben's being daddy daycare as he was last week, but I've got a jam-packed episode. And if you haven't joined us before, we run 6, 7-figure and 8-figure self-made companies, and we share the highs and lows and transparency, but underneath the bonnet of a business, so that hopefully our listeners, you guys, can benefit and onboard our mistakes and learn from our winnings. And I'm excited about today's episode because it's actually going to be a bit of a deep dive into something very particular. So I will be sharing what that looks like. So for podcast listeners, it's the 15th of November. And starting off the episode, we're going to be talking about assisted sales and why the Labour government changing the stamp duty changes is going to be great for assisted sales strategies. We'll be talking about the Property Week ESG Awards, why we were there. We'll be talking about a massive change, probably the most bullish change that I've seen come into government around real estate that I will be sharing it specifically around retail properties. I'll be talking about reviewing your staff and what a hard review and a soft review might look like. I'll be talking about logical calendar management. I know everyone going into Christmas, everything's super busy, and there's one top tip of what you need to do. I'll be sharing a completion that we've recently did this week in Central Suites and what we bought. And then I'm going to be doing a deep dive into both residential market forecasts and also development market forecast. I've got all of this data and information from Savills Research Centre, so it's all valid stuff that you can be tuning into to see where the trends are going, which is super important if you're buying, developing, or even coming to the market to sell. I'll be talking about investors. One of the hardest part of our jobs is finding investment and whether you need new investors or better relationships. And then last but not least, a final update on the Old Maltings and planning. So those of you listening on podcast, 15th November, let's get going. So if you haven't heard about us talk assisted sales before, it's a really simple strategy that you can use if you're struggling to make, particularly residential properties, this works well with. If you're struggling to make them work well, if you're buying them, refurbishing them and selling them, or is typically the way that an assisted sale works best. So if you are watching on the screen, you can see a comparable analysis here on numbers, but I will try and talk through it for the podcast listeners. So this is a project that we did in Central Suites last year. It was a 3-month project, believe it or not. And the way that this came about is we could have either bought it off the vendor, which means we'd have had purchase costs, we'd have had the finance, the legals, the stamp duty to get in and buy the building, and then we would have also had the cost of construction, which is inevitable, and then we would be trying to make a profit with all of those encompassing costs that you would have in any normal purchase: a purchase price, purchase cost, legals, works, and then you sell it at the gross development value, and then you obviously have sales and finance costs that come out the bottom end of that. What I'm showing on the screen is if we bought that property at £280,000, we'd have lost £2,500 doing that exercise on a gross development value of 350. There's just not enough margin in there. But the seller, their expectations were higher. Their expectations was at 300,000. So what you can do in that situation is say, okay, I will pay you 300,000. but I want to do the works on the property, you still own it, and then we'll sell it for £385,000, which is actually what we achieved. Lower costs in, there were still agency fees and legal costs to get the joint venture agreed, but we ended up splitting the profit 50-50, which is £23,000. We only spent 32 on it. So if you do the math, it's a 72% return on capital. Now, this, what I'm showing you on the screen, is pre the stamp duty changes that went up from the budget last month. So what you can see here is the stamp duty on the left hand side would have been £9,900 to buy it at £280,000. In today's market, because of the changes, that would be £15,500 to buy in a limited company. So it's even £5,000 even worse off. So if we made 50k on this flip, that's 10% of the margin is gone further on the increase on stamp duty. So I'd highly advise that you try and adopt this if you're flipping residential houses, because we literally signed the contract in January and we had sold it in July. So the construction was like 3 months. The sales process only took 4 months, and we had traded that site back out within 7 months. It was a crazy project to turn it around that quickly. And to give you a bit of an idea of what that did from a return on investment perspective, yes, it was 72%, but that's 145% because it was just inside the 7-month mark, which is a huge return. And as these stamp duty prices have gone up, it's sort of almost nourishing the market to focus more on assisted sales. So that's why we love them. You can do them on much bigger scales. Ben and I did one on a mixed-use development with 7 flats, where we didn't buy the building, but we handhelded the design and planning process, sold it with planning, and we both benefited from that transaction as per se. So that's what an assisted sale is. What I'm getting at is it's way more prevalent in today's market because stamp duty has obviously gone up from 3% to 5%, a 2% increase. What you have to picture is that's actually like a 40%, I believe, increase on top of what it already was. So a huge cost saving there to be had for assisted sale markets. If I can get my slides to work, there we go. Moving on to Property Week ESG. So Aparo Social, which is our side hustle social housing portfolio we've been building for probably close to 4 years now. 120 studio beds in South London that are supported living tenant with a registered housing association underneath that. We're actually finalists for 2 awards. Unfortunately, we didn't end up picking an award. This event is huge. There's some huge behemoth organizations there. You know, this stage was, frequently visited by the Berkeley Group, by big players, big capital companies, big ESG providing companies, big funds. And I did feel like a very small fish in a very big pond. But I mean, these are the sort of networks that you want to be in and you want to be networking with. So it was a really fun event. Loved going to it. The actual like tech behind how they did the awards was absolutely crazy and great. And it was a thoroughly enjoyable event, and I'll be definitely heading there next year. So this is like a crazy one that I was talking to a guy that specializes in like retail. I want to call it retail therapy because people go and buy stuff from shops, but it's kind of that really. His business is all around saving retail. And we were chatting on the phone, and he was telling me about basically this is currently was published under the Conservative government, but it's still in review, and it will be interesting to see what the Labour government do with this particular case that's being pushed forward in the government. And basically, the government is trying to push landlords with vacant retail buildings to let them out or sell them or do something with them. And what they're looking at doing is something along the lines of, if it's a vacant building, tenants or businesses within the community have a right to rent the building. So they basically force hand on the landlord to rent the space if it's vacant, to promote business growth in the local area, community support, the economic sort of microeconomic growth within that city, but also preventing an empty building just sitting there, whether they manage to get it derated or whatever it may be. So huge change. And what they're also looking at potentially bringing in is they're basically almost running this like a high street rental auction is like the tagline they're running with it. So it's going to be quite bullish there in the market, because if that change does come in, it's going to change a lot of strategy for people that do land bank. People that may be buying sites to take it into planning might have issues with tenants coming in and forcing their right to rent. And also, if you have plans to vacate a site to develop it or do something with it, you might again come up against a new tenant forcing their hand on right to rent. So definitely something to watch out for. I believe it's currently been raised in the levelling up agenda that was obviously adopted by the Conservative government, now brought in, and we will see what Labour will do with that. But definitely one to watch, because I think there will be opportunity. I think there'll be some desperation in the market by some ownership, and definitely some opportunities to pick up some deals, really. Cool. If you haven't before, could you please rate us? We actually had a really nice review came in earlier today. Someone said they watched it back 3 times because they had to take their notepad through the last episode that we produced. So thank you, Peter, for the review that you've left. Really appreciate it. And if you could also, if you're a listener, go and rate us, because it helps us make this better. And also, obviously, make sure you ask questions too. So coming on to company soft reviews. So really long story short, we've talked about previously in episodes how we carry out one-to-one reviews with our staff. So that typically is when you hire someone, you normally have their induction on day one. You normally do a 3-month review, which is sort of part of the probationary period. And then we typically go to a 6-month, 12-month, 24, 36, etc. So we review them then every year. Meeting like a year apart is a very, very long time, specifically given the average duration for an employee, might only be, if you're a good company, 5 to 10 years. If you're like a, big corporate, it might be longer. If you're a smaller company, it might be shorter. If you're a high stress company, it might be shorter. So we've integrated this strategy where we're not looking at the input and the output of the employee. We're just taking them out for lunch and just having a chat with them. And this is something new to us, and it'll be interesting to hear if anyone else does anything similar. Obviously, we like the social element within our company, and we try to make it feel more of a family than an operational business where there's no emotion in anything. We think that you have to enjoy what you do, and to get the best out of the team, and for the team to get the best out of their sort of career. There's autonomy, there's flow, they're happy. And sometimes that happiness doesn't necessarily come from the sit down sort of job description review. So we've started doing this, we're keen to get our feedback from our staff, but we think it's a good idea. And it might be stuff like, the commute into work is getting to them, or they've had a pretty difficult time at home and they could do with a bit more flexibility around the role. That isn't necessarily something you discuss in the review, because if they haven't reviewed for 12 months, they might be trying to look for pay package reviews or slightly change of job, or maybe even a promotion. And it's quite a negative connotation to be asking for more in that environment. So hopefully it's extending our sort of open door policy that we always have with our team, so that it's just a check-in point, an opportunity for them to just actually talk about what they want to talk about, and not necessarily driven by results. Because at the end of the day, we're humans. Humans like to build a connection with people. And I feel that when you're working in small businesses, a lot of the people that work within the organization are there for the team, the morale, and sometimes, the leadership. So as part of that leadership, the last that you can do is take them out to lunch and ask how everything is. And it could be, they could talk about their dog. They could talk about how they're going camping, next weekend, or whatever it may be. There's no agenda. It's a loosely structured conversation, and you kind of let them lead the conversation, because quite frequently in reviews, there's an agenda and you're leading that conversation. So stay tuned. I'll feed you in sort of probably middle of next year on how we're getting on that, and see what benefits we get from it. Cool. On to calendar management. Now, this is quite a big one for anyone in our industries, where it's people driven, meetings driven, investors driven, lawyers, booking in things. Between now and Christmas, the diary is literally like, I can remember last year, I think I went for like 4 Christmas dinners in 1 week before it was even Friday. And you do have to be really diligent about actually what and where is your time best spent. And we're going through a really busy period of time in our business. Obviously, Ben's being a family man at the moment, quite rightly, and I'm studying at Goldman Sachs. There's certain things that I've actually had to go, I don't think this is a good use of my time at this moment in time, and be a little bit selfish around that, and not just say, oh, that sounds cool, because when you're thrown for an example, got invited into London to go to an event, and there's an activity, and it does sound really fun, but there's 2 hours in, 2 hours back. It'll probably put you off the next morning, because you'll get back fairly late. You might not get anything done that afternoon, because you're getting ready and going into the city for that. So be really diligent around your calendar and think, what do I need to achieve before the end of the year? How does that fit in my calendar first? Block that out, and then you can pick around the events that you would like to go to. And of course, go to events. You've got to build relationships. You've got to make sure that the people you're working with, you do see the other side to them than, always trying to get deals over the line and it getting very stressful. So in that capacity, I would highly recommend that you just actually take a little bit more control, rather than just saying yes to everything. And actually think, how does this benefit the business between now and Christmas? Or you might be overworked and go, actually, I'm going to go on an absolute Christmas bender and take everyone up on everything because I love Christmas. And, that might be you. But have a think about it. That, the real message here, and I've had to sort of talk to myself about it, is just have a think about what's going in the diary. Is it worth your time? Is it pushing something else back, which might be really important over December, because everyone else is out and about and meeting up and doing this and doing that. Not a lot of work gets done. So you need to prioritize that work. Also, if you need other people to be doing transactions or whatever it may be, you need to focus that you've delivered what you need to deliver so that they can do the same. So morally, sometimes it's okay or good for the business to say no. Cool. So central suites. So this has actually been burning away, I think, for about 6 months. Dawn in our team, who's our estate manager, did a great job of securing this property. It is actually, fun fact, the third property on the same road that we've bought. And I think there's only like 50 houses on this road. So we're working our way up to hopefully buy 100% of the road one day. But it's in our lovely town called Abingdon, where we have most of our HMO portfolio. And we also have some of our developments, which one of which I'll be coming on the last slide, which is the Old Maltings. But yeah, we bought this house, and quite frankly, it needs a lot of TLC. It also had existing planning to do a ground floor extension, which if you're watching on the screen, you can see that there's a large sort of 34 meter squared extension going on at the back end, which it already had planning for. We actually put in a non-material amendment to replay the layouts, put some more glazing on the flat roof, and to put some more en suites in, basically, for a HMO. This is only a 6-bed, so we don't actually require full planning permission because there's no Article 4 direction in this location. But yeah, exciting news. We completed on the purchase. The bank finance on this is actually a person personally lending, which is quite fun. But they've kind of come in as almost like a bank position. And then we've also got a couple of investors that have come on board to invest in the projects. We deliver it out. We should be finished in construction sort of mid-summer, hopefully sooner. And then we'll be letting this out, and it will join part of the portfolio in Abingdon and part of the portfolio on this particular road. We've actually flipped a house on this road and already got a HMO on this road. It's actually the first road that we bought a HMO on. So 6-bed in Abingdon, it'll be a nice little cash cow. We think it'll be really well valued up. We actually paid £272,000 for this. And the reason being, it is in really, 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 really bad state of repair internally. It was lived in, believe it or not, probably one of the worst we've seen as a lived-in property. But stay tuned, because we're going to have a bit of design flair on this one. We're going to try and do a few things different from a design perspective, and it is going to be a really nice grand HMO, because it's huge. So it's going to be a massive house. I mean, to have a 34 meters squared kitchen living space is huge. You know, that's bigger than some 1-bed flats that have been built over PD. So super excited to get started on that. And yeah, stay tuned. Cool. So the main part of today's episode was actually to share what I was learning on a webinar this week with Savills. Now, obviously, Savills, you all know as commercial agents, resi agents, but they also have a vast research team. They also have an investment company. So they kind of got the finger on the pulse in the market. Actually, at the property ESG event, I was sat next to a guy from America. And he was saying that they're prevalent over in the American market as well, which I actually wasn't aware of. So there you go. You learn something new every day. I thought Savills was a very British, we only work in Britain company, but evidently not. But fundamentally, what I'm sort of sharing is I've kind of condensed the key points from this webinar, and I'm going to be sharing with you. You're probably thinking I'm bastardizing their information, but hopefully I'm a little bit more exciting to listen to than the Savills research team. But equally, hopefully I can also sort of replicate what that means for people like us, property investors, property developers, HMO landlords, or whatever it may be. I think this is probably slightly more angled towards the sort of buy-to-let HMO and development space. There's a lot of really rich data in here that they pushed out, which I love. I'm a data-driven person, and I think that if you're not, you might come unstuck from a cash flow or financial perspective one day. So always absorb data. But I've broken it up into 2 parts, resi and also development. So let's first look at the house prices and against supply and demand. So this graph, and also I will also say, if you're listening on the podcast, I'm going to really try my best to explain this as well as I can, because there's a lot of visual graphs on here. I would recommend that if you enjoy my explanation, maybe you can come back onto our YouTube channel and watch it back for more of a visual experience. Yeah, I'll try to do my best. So yeah, so house prices. So this graph in front of us shows nominal house prices and real house prices. Now, the difference between nominal house prices and real house prices is nominal house prices is the current price of the house as in terms of the money at the time, whereas real house prices is a price house after it's been adjusted for inflation. So you can see the pink sort of boxes are the real house prices, and then the blue section is the nominal house price. Obviously, this is quite relevant for as inflation fluctuates in a market, it does have quite a big impact on affordability, cost of living, house prices, obviously. But actually, what is trading in the market is also really interesting and rich data. Coincidentally, it kind of does follow. And where it kind of does follow is is actually really interesting. We had a huge dip in sort of September 2023, where actually the real house price had a huge drop compared to the nominal house price, so the actual price that stuff's selling for. And I believe that's just because the market still does move. So you can kind of see the same trajectory, which is really interesting because it is related. But it's also good to understand where the house price markets are moving. Where we can currently see this is the most positive thing that you can see about this graph and take away from it is between the end of sort of 2023, the end of 2022 and the early 2023, we went below house growth. So houses didn't go up in value in either space, real or nominal house pricing. It then sort of comes back up and comes out of the trough in sort of December 2023. So what you can take away from that is 2022 to 2023 was not a great year for anyone doing anything that we're doing. And actually, if you take the whole trough as a whole, so the start of the dip to now, we're still not back to the property markets that we were in the early 2022, when we saw that huge growth just up, in the COVID period where everyone was like, I need to move house. I think there's two things there. People wanting to live in a nicer property because they've looked at their own four walls in a property more than they ever had because of the restrictions that we had from leaving the home. But also people probably thought life's too short. They probably made, plans and goals with their partners while they're in, locked in and thinking, you know what, let's just go for it. Let's move. Let's move to a countryside. Let's move abroad. The amount of people that I know have done that forced, I suppose the housing market to change quite quickly. So back into sort of the context of it. So if you start looking at mid 2022, when I feel that sort of peak started to, really start to come down and inflation started really impacting the cost of living in the market, all the way to now, we're still not recovered. But the most important thing is the graph is recovering, and it has been recovering for about a year. So I think the positivity we can hopefully take from this is that we stay on a positive trajectory. And, okay, if it flattens out, it flattens out, but then at least we've got consistency in the market. I know a lot of developers in this space, a lot of property investors, we don't want big peaks and troughs. We're not sort of timing investors. In actual fact, I know no one that wants timing. Timing is a thing, and it's good to take advantage of if you know what you're doing and you can sort of live and breathe the market. But we're not here for timing. We're here for consistency, and we're here for activity. So hopefully that does come from our learnings of that particular graph. Next slide. So residential market forecast. So within this report, I've delved down. I know most of our listeners are probably around the southeast, so I've tried to sort of target this area more so than others. One thing I found really interesting about this slide in front of us is it talks about the house price growth in the UK since 2007. I don't really like that they've selected 2007 because that's kind of just before the credit crunch. They probably tried to straddle that blip and take a long-term view, which actually, if you look from the graph, doesn't look that scary. But we have had a significant rise. And if you actually look at what we're looking at in front of us, it's positive growth throughout the way through. And that's kind of the way that most people see the UK property market. We're in Ireland. We're not getting enough stuff through planning. We're not building enough stuff. Population is growing. Where is, the best place to invest? Kind of most places, because you can't, like in the States, you can't build a 300,000 home development village, and then it's just a new access point between two development villages because they've got masses of land. We don't, and we've also got greenbelt, and we've also got areas of outstanding natural beauty. We've also got heritage areas. We've also got connection links. We've also got rivers. Like my mind is, I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here. My mind is boggled that it takes people from Oxfordshire to get to London twice as long because there's the Thames River that goes through, and we've got to cross a bridge, and there's not enough bridges. Like in the States, we'll be like, let's put a new bridge through. And we don't have that attitude because we're obviously quaint people that like sitting in traffic. Or, most Californians like sitting in traffic. But anyway, back on track. But what I found this really interesting to look at is actually the house price to earnings ratio. So what that is for listeners out there is what you earn against what you can buy. So for an example, the average price in the UK is about 350,000 pounds, and then the average wage in the UK is 1/8 of that. So back in, I used to have this conversation with my father quite a lot because he believes the property market is easier now. I believe it's more difficult to get onto the property ladder and to be a property investor or whatever it may be, even if it's just a personal home, because your salary isn't as large of a percentage as the property value. Whereas back in those days, you might be on £4,000 per year and buy a house for £8,000 per year. So it's a 2x multiple in your salary. So what I find really interesting about this is actually analysing backwards data and where the market's going. And I think that's really good for creative ideas like HMOs. HMOs are actually a more affordable way than someone renting a one-bedroom flat. So you're supporting the growth of their, deposit bank or the savings account to buy a property sooner. And it's those cost of living and changes in the market that when you spot them and provide something that the market needs, you will perform better than competitors. But what is also interesting is outside the Southeast, the ratio is eight times the earnings, and inside the Southeast it's 10 times. So you can obviously see that salaries don't really reflect the value exchange that you're getting in the South, which I thought was really interesting. Let's talk about base rates. So we recently had a dip, 25 basis points down. We'll put that in the bag. I don't know if anyone else gets an email from all of their lenders letting you know that you're paying a little bit less, but normally still quite a lot. But this is Savills Data's predictions, basically. What their predictions are is not only just base rate, it's also base rate and the anticipated average of mortgage rates. And this is probably stipulated around actually just a residential mortgage. So if you're moving into a new home with a family or on your own, but it's just you on a residential mortgage, not a buy-to-let, not commercial, not an investment product, not you're buying a warehouse that's for Amazon storage. This is specifically speaking for residential homes. It's obviously got the tracker on there for the exact tracking of base rate all the way up to the point of now. And they have predictions that it's going to go all the way down to 2%. And it should, so it's basically like a clean linear decline from now all the way down to about, where is it, September 2027. So what is that? So 3 years. They're anticipating that we're going to drop a further, 2.75%. So if you did the maths, you could probably work out that that's a lot of 25 basis point reductions down there to get us down to that point, which is nice and good to see. You can also see the average mortgage rate. So we're currently sat around 4.5-5%, and they also believe that will follow in a similar fashion but slightly delayed and get down to just below 3%. So hopefully we get back into that market space and promote positivity and activity. Interestingly, we were obviously at 0% interest rate back in March 2021. And they're not saying it's going to get back down to there. So the new norm that you should put into your numbers and your figures and when you're stress testing things is not going to be back down to that 0% mark. I would actually probably say that what we're doing to stress test our deals, HMOs and developments, is we're not putting any decreases in at all. We're keeping the rate as it is, or kind of where the market is today. And if the scheme works, the scheme works. We're not baking in any further reductions. A lot of people were kicking off that their mortgage offers or offers that they've received from mortgage companies and not yet completed on didn't go down with the base rate change. But the thing is, base rate, and as discussed in the last episode, might have actually been pegged on SONIA swap rates, might have been pegged on deposit rates, might have been neglected by the market, rather than actually following exactly base rate. You've got to remember that all banks, well, no banks borrow directly from England, Bank of England. So when their rates go down, their money goes down. You've got to look at where their source of funds come from. If they buy in larger markets, they buy their finance at X, they're putting it out to you at Y. If base rate changed, their finance might not have changed. They might have locked it in for a longer period. Their lender might not have changed their figures. So we obviously have that trickle effect. From our perspective, where do we see development finance? Where do we see HMO products? Realistically, back 5 years ago, we were getting HMO products between 2 and 5%, and I think they'll always fall between there for a very long time. From a development and bridging and sort of refurbishment perspective, we're currently just below 10% as a rate. I think we'll probably soften slightly. Back when we bought our milling building, we were paying 7.5. I don't think it's going to get that low again. I think we're realistically going to be between 8 and 10% over the next few years. But hopefully, and as I mentioned at the sort of start of this, we just want consistency. We want consistent activity that's more predictable, that puts a bit of confidence back in the market so the stock is trading. And that will aid us all to, grow and scale our businesses. But I hope that was useful. So they've basically done a bit of a summary to the outlook for 2025 and what we can expect. So 4% mainstream house price forecast to increase, and 3% in the Southeast. So Southeast seeing less growth, but you could potentially argue that we have had slightly better growth potentially than northern parts of the UK. Now this one is really visual, so sorry podcast listeners, but again I'll try and explain it. So this map, it's kind of a heat map, but what it is telling us is over the last 4 years, people have moved to cheaper locations. So that's the general consensus of this. So what you can see on the left-hand side is the house price growth. So what things are priced at. And what you can see on the right is the average transaction value. So what this is analyzing is how much stuff costs and how much it's been growing, against exactly how much it was worth. So obviously if you drop your prices on a product, you will normally get an influx of demand. Housing hasn't always been that way. In a rising market, people pick location, people pick schools, people pick being around their family, probably more prevalently than the capital cost saving of up sticks and moving to a new relocating or moving to a new location. But this map actually shows that there is clear definition in the Southeast where people have moved to cheaper locations. They've moved, branched out. They've gone to, whether they were on the train for an hour to get into the city, they might be now doing 2 hours and going in less frequently. And I think this is driven by a number of things: people moving away from the city, commuting in less, hybrid working, people wanting more for their money. You go and look up north and what you could buy for a 1-bed flat in central London. Everyone knows you get more for your money. You could buy an estate up in sort of Lincolnshire for the price of a studio flat in central London. But it's all about sort of that has happened, and that has been an action that has been taken over the last 4 years. We kind of all knew that because houses in Cornwall, second houses in Cornwall, were getting bought up by celebrities, and it was a talk of the town. But what this is really sort of showing is that sort of, I suppose you could call it, expansion of market activity and pulling it away from into the city. But I think that's going to then contract back in and sort of level out, because there's been less activity in the more expensive areas, which shows that Savills are predicting that in the Southeast property values won't go up as much as the whole of the UK. But I think that there is opportunity to still think about locations that are cheaper and more desirable. B, I think that's allowing more activity in areas like where I live in Oxfordshire. But just understanding this data is really important for what stock you're bringing to the market. Cool. So to condense this down and to look at who's going to be buying and who's going to be able to be buying sort of between years before and now, well, 3-year pandemic average, really. We've had a 10% increase of first-time buyers, a 26% on home movers. That's also communicating what we saw from the last image. A 20% increase in mortgage buy-to-let properties. That might be because people, they've had their good end of turn at cheap rates, and they're now getting into the market, and a reduction in cash buyers. So to summarize the Resi market, they think mainstream housing is going up 3% in the Southeast and 4% across the UK. They think it's also going to be going up 17.5% in the Southeast over the next 5 years, and 23% across the UK. So it's like a clean sort of 3 to 4% capital appreciation growth. Because of the base, they believe because Bank of England base rate will come down, hopefully mortgage rates will come down too. Which brings hopefully more mortgage, home movers into the market to breathe a little bit of activity. I don't know if there's a bit of messaging going on here because they're an agent. Is it promoting them to get a bit of sales out of this to, think, oh, maybe we will list our property in the new year, and Savills did that talk and they're really good, so I'll go to them. So I would take that with a pinch of salt. But definitely buy-to-let landlords, as the market restructures, individual landlords that own buy-to-let properties within their own name, they've really struggled over the last few years, and I would say that I will continue to see that happening. The amount of landlords that I know that own their real estate in their own name that are just rescinding their asset and saying, you know what, I just want to get rid of it, that is an even more common thing. I was with an estate agent who runs his own firm at the weekend, and he's got a buy-to-let property, and he's just like, I don't really want it. I don't want the headache. I'm not really making much of it. I'm being taxed on the revenue of the income. I can't offset my mortgage costs, and it's just not a lot in it for me. And he's a property guy. He understands the market. He could probably, leverage that back up and do another project. So it's interesting to see that market move, and he is on about potentially selling it and looking at a limited company structure, or just focusing on his business, because we're getting taxed. That's the fundamental of it. And as the stamp duty change came in, that if it is buying on your second property, that is the case for limited companies too. So we may be getting targeted, and that may even get more prevalent if Labour government brought in taxation of non-taxation on mortgage costs. It would be an absolute landslide for a lot of businesses out there, property investment businesses. And then hopefully we'll have a growing market, but we will see. And then last point, they say growth will be strongest in the more affordable area regions, which I'd agree with. I think people are looking for more bang for their buck and thinking, I will move, I will travel, whatever it may be. That's that. So moving on to the development market forecast. So this is more around, strategic stuff, bigger plays, and what we're doing as potentially as a country or as a development outfit to communicate with the market that we're dealing with, and we've been sort of in for the last few years. So again, a visual. This is sort of a heat map of delivery versus proposed houses needs targets. So the white sections, which is basically nowhere, shows that met housing needs are, so there's no surplus or deficit on housing market needs. And then the darker areas are over 50% below the target that they were targeted on. So basically, summarizing for the podcast listeners, most of the south of the UK are nowhere near their targets, nowhere near 50%. And that the huge challenges is in the south. So that might also be an explanation of why people are moving out. We've had a -7% homes gaining planning consents in sort of Q3 2024, -13% new homes completed in Q3 2024, -18% new homes started in Q3 2024. Like 18% decrease in new homes being built is a crazy stat, given that we've just said all of the stats say on the screen that we're not hitting our housing targets, and then all the stats on the right-hand screen say that we've had a deficit in change. The trend is we're doing less. How is this going to be resolved? So huge opportunity there. Obviously, it comes with its bottlenecks and limitations, planning, funding, risk, whatever it may be. But yeah, huge opportunity and gap in the market to also pick that up. Then we've got in here, this is a chart which is sharing the sort of average house builder sales per outlet per week, which is a bit of a mouthful. If I'm really honest, I don't know what an outlet is. I'm guessing it's probably like a branch or a region. But basically, the linear graph shows from 2008 to 2004, we had a really big sort of spurt up. Well, a good consistent spurt up from 2008 to 2021. And basically, COVID has had a huge drop off that. So that huge drop and gap and grey area is actually the reason that I believe that there's a good opportunity to get into this space and put housing into the market, because we've talked about buy-to-lets going back on the on the open market. So not everyone can afford. Cost of living is making it more difficult to afford. So there needs to be a solution going into the market. I'll talk shortly about one solution that I think is prevalent and been really important. But this graph obviously shows that there is we're currently in a trough of how many developers are averaging sales. And what is that? Is that market? Is that interest rates? Is it people not moving? Is it planning's not being approved, so they're reducing their sales rate? Because developers won't build the houses if the sales aren't there. They're a little bit more akin to, rather than we have small brownfield sites or existing buildings in good locations, so we just crack on and build them out. And that market is a little bit more active. But for like new home building, if you're building 1,000 homes, you do have to think about how many homes are actually going to be bought in this market space. Okay, 150 a year if we take 10% of the market. So let's just build 150 a year. That's the view that developers take, and it has been on decline. Some of that could be down to a lot of PLC builders actually stopped construction because they didn't know where the market was going during COVID. They made big sort of, well, you could say firing sort of sweeps to reduce their overheads. And obviously, before you develop land, it's accruing very little cost of interest on finance. But as soon as you start building assets and they sit there empty, they start accruing more finance costs on the build costs, obviously the build costs. And obviously, you might then be stamped with council tax, insurance, keeping it warm, all of these things that you got to think about around sales rates. So interesting to see that. Another table. I won't talk too much about the data on the table, but it's actually more the topic of a strategy. So build to rent is something that's been around for a very long time. And, it was actually typically kind of invented by the councils to some degree, where they would build properties and then rent them out to the local public. And that was obviously the standard council housing that were thrown up after the war to resolve a housing crisis at that time. But build to rent in this capacity is obviously very different. It's a sort of conducive scheme where they're building large buildings, renting them out, and they normally have shared sort of amenities and spaces, so that they get economies of scale in terms of what has actually been created in that space. So if we're building a 3-flat development, we're not going to have a lobby, a concierge, a lounge, a postal room, a bin store. Well, we obviously will have a bin store, but not like a managed one. Maybe even a coffee shop on site and a Tesco's, on one of the corners of the buildings. Whereas this is a much more inclusive product that is actually in really good demand at the moment. And allows those people that can't afford to buy homes an affordable place to live, because the more units they can put together for build to rent, the more that they supply the demand that is there. So what they're getting at as build to rent has been great and will continue booming, which is something I would agree with. Land values. So I found this one super interesting. So on this table, we've got the UK house prices. We've got UK greenfield land values, and we have UK urban land values. So at the very bottom is the UK urban land values. The sort of middle line is the greenfield land values, and then the red is obviously the residential house prices. Coincidentally, we always talk about like who's going to wear this change in cost, who's going to wear this change in like house price change, and we normally go, well, the vendor that owns the field doesn't really care. But what you can see is confidence was hugely dropped in 2008 when we had the credit crunch, but property prices actually didn't change so much and land values went really low. So that would have been a great time to get in at. We've got a little bit of a spike around the COVID boost around, property prices going really well, and then a decline again. It actually follows quite linearly, which is good. You will also notice that the house price and land values has increased its gap, and that is because build costs and interest rates have gone up. So what that tells us is the land values are actually reflecting across the board what eventually gets transacted on. They are keeping in line to make sure that that obviously you have the land value, but you have all the costs on top of that. So it's kind of a linearage that goes up and gets a bit wider, which is interesting to see from a macro perspective, because the only time we talk about this is just hearsay. So the three sentiments that they've put is greenfield development land has remained stable, but urban values are more challenged. What does that mean by urban values? I mean, I think that's predominantly because in the pandemic, everyone moved away from the urban environment and into the sort of greenfield sites. But I think that there's actually going to be quite a bit of demand to come back in. Location is kind of being, someone named the program location. It's always been a really strong driver for a property, even before you've even walked through the front door, and is a big consideration. Normally, when you go on Rightmove, what do you type in first? The location. So I believe that might be a sort of expansion and contraction of that result, but we will have to see. They've also said notable returns of major house builders alongside partnerships. So as I mentioned, national home builders did stop building sites. I would have thought they would have still brought their land bank in and planning plays in, because planning takes forever, and also it's a really good return on cash. But they also need their construction margin, but they're back on site. And interestingly, they've said alongside partnerships, maybe to de-risk the future of their businesses, they're actually partnering with landowners more rather than buying it and trying to make margin on planning and construction. And then last, improving sentiment following the election, but muted activity levels. I'm seeing this. I don't think we're going to see much more activity into the new year. We've had a really good spell selling our site units in Tame. I think that's just because there's huge demand for that product in that area that's been pent up. But I feel that we're not going to see much activity into the new year. It would be really great if we can have another base rate cut before the new year, so that when we go into the new year and everyone's sat on the sofa and eating too many pigs in blankets, they're thinking about what they want to do next year. And there's that drive, which normally comes in sort of January. The busiest time in gyms is January, because everyone's got their shit dialed down and they know exactly what they're going to do this year. And then by the February, there's probably the most cancellations. Again, another point on sort of significant regional variation in land values. Interestingly, Scotland has seen the biggest influx in land values, the north as well. So I actually believe, and this is Jack's theory, so it might be wrong, but I'm going to use my educated estimate. So I believe that the north has seen a biggest change in land values because the percentage of the land value isn't too much of a difference for the build cost, whereas land values down south, you're normally getting in at a higher position. So I believe that the biggest change is in the north, because land's always been cheaper. So a 4% change on a 200 grand plot isn't a massive change, but a 2% change on a £1 million plot is quite a significant change in the south from a monetary value. So that's why I believe the southeast and UK and east is stayed pretty consistent. So current drivers in land markets in the southeast. So heightened affordability constraints. I mean, this is, I think it was HSBC launched. Oh no, sorry, it was Halifax that launched their first sort of, I think it was like 6x mortgage on income. We'll see how that plays, but it's more difficult to afford things nowadays, so therefore it's more difficult to buy. There's an ongoing shortage of land supply. This is what they would try to address in planning, with bringing these grey belt sites forward in sort of brownfield and greenfield areas that sort of overlap and might complement each other. I mean, is there a shortage of land? I don't agree with that, if I'm really honest. I just think we're not creative enough. Obviously, permitted development rights was brought out in 2015. I don't know the stats on this, but if you looked at how many dwelling houses have been brought into the market because of that one national policy framework that changed, it would be huge. It would be huge. We're reusing disused office buildings. No one wants a 20,000 square foot behemoth office building in Reading town centre anymore. They're going to go on the outskirts in a big industrial sort of business park because people aren't commuting in and out every day. So what could that be? Resi. And then what can you do in the high street? Create an environment, create a community, and create retail. So, and one of the other reasons I don't necessarily agree that ongoing shortage of land is the issue. Maybe Savills are just being too polite here, because I just completely blame the councils and the planning. Because look, fun fact, our housing target is to hit, was to hit in the Conservative government 300,000 units per year. There's almost 200,000 units that are stuck in water neutrality, where they just can't get their finger on the pulse on what they need to do to get those units approved. So if the process was improved, there's 200,000 units there approved day one. If you then focus on other things like PD, how can that be enhanced and improved? Improving the time it takes to get planning, improving how simple it is to submit and cost up a planning application, I believe that there would be very little to say about land shortages. So I don't agree with that one. Declining appetite for Section 106 or affordable sales. That's kind of really not my bag. Yeah, I'm going to leave that to your imagination. I'd actually like you to hear in the comments what we think that means. I mean, declining appetite for Section 106, affordable sales. I mean, it's been a difficult, obviously, a lot of Section 106 buyers have been affordable foundations, charities, registered housing associations, forward funding housing associations. It's been difficult business for everyone. Costs have gone up for everyone. I was actually chatting about, we in our portfolio have a portfolio product for all of our utility bills, but thinking about our income, we can technically to some degree push some of that change of cost of living onto tenants. So if our bills have gone up, twofold, we might charge our tenants 10% more rent. But a social housing provider, their rent is actually government, it's not grants, but it's government income from universal credit. That is a fixed fee. If their utilities go up, their margin is getting crunched and crunched and crunched. So I can see that there's probably quite a lot of businesses in that space that have struggled. I mean, I believe that every business has struggled, and I keep hearing survive to 25. But I think that that's probably hit those sort of less enterprising businesses. We actually had a boardroom session today, a really good boardroom session. We went through a load of deals, but we have a couple of spots available. We're going to be launching a new strategy on a page where we set goals, and we work those goals back from 5 years on how you can grow and scale a business like ours, or one of the businesses like we run. And the seats keep filling up, so make sure you inquire, because we will be launching it in the new year with new strategy in place to really implement where you want to get to. Cool. So second to last point, do you need new investors or better relationships? So this actually sort of reminds me of a conversation that I had with a mentee ages ago, where their goals were so like, I want to speak to 5 investors this month, and I want to speak to 5 investors next month, and then we'll come to the following month, I want to speak to 5 investors. Sometimes it might be a better idea to build the relationships with the existing investors you've got, rather than building new relationships with new investors. And the reason I say that is because if you went to school, for an example, and every day tried to make 5 new friends, you'd probably end up leaving the school being a really nice guy that everyone likes, but you won't have core deep relationships with people that really know, like, and trust you, really put their faith in you, will help you when you need help, you can help them when they need help, and focusing on a slightly tighter network. And it was purely because we're taking our investors out tomorrow for a round of golf, and it's actually a bit more of a strategy that we came from the big £10 million raise that we were focusing on doing. Then we got the terms and didn't really like it. It was a bit cynical and costly, and meant that we'd have to scale our business through the roof to see any benefit from that. But what I actually took away from that is build the relationships with the people that are invested in you already and want to grow your business with you. And let's see what comes from bettering those relationships. And one thing that does come from that is, 1, they're easier to work with. 2, they might lend you some more money. 3, they might have people that can lend you money, so you're leveraging their network. And 4, it's actually quite enjoyable. If you have a better relationship with someone, I'm not talking about, have a bit of a, relax around them, tell them a little bit of a cock up that you had. That is, to me, a good test of a good investor. If you just sort of outline, say, a bit of, I did this the other day, and it's a funny thing that you've done completely wrong, but you're only human. And if they laugh and they get on with you, they like you, that's probably more important than how they actually see you as a professional, because we're all humans, and that part of the relationship is where you kind of want to be with your investors. So make sure you've got strong investor relationships. Last but not least, hot off the press today, I would normally let Ben run on to about planning stuff, but it's my day today, so sorry, Ben. So yeah, really, really good news. Our scheme, the Old Maltings, this has been a really complex planning application process. So I'm super glad that we've got a really strong professional team around us. That includes Logic Planning. Thanks very much, Lorenzo. We've got Aura Architecture, and we've obviously got the XP team leading on this. But the building that we bought was currently vacant, was an office. We got planning consent to convert it to 16 flats. We then bought the building. We then got further planning to convert it to 20 flats. We then got further planning to do an external application to put in skylights, balconies, to make it 20. Well, it was kind of 20, 21 flats at that point. We then did another application to change the facade of the building at the front and to put these boxes of houses that that box around those houses that I can show you. So it kind of looks like we're extending the building by the eye. It may be considered to look like flats, but it's actually 2 houses and 2 garages that we've gone in for, which will be HMOs, which we're super excited for and buzzing to get to bring that in as a part of the program. Obviously boosted the GDV significantly. I think the increase on the GDV after that application that we've had there is well over £1 million. I think it's probably about 1.2, 1.3 million quid, and obviously not going to cost us to do that. So yeah, super buzzing about that, and you know, it's a great site, and it's actually probably one of my favorite sites because it's a beautiful building with heritage feel about it, because it used to be the malt house for the brewery. So I love it, and it's a really good location and backs onto Waitrose. And this is the site that I was on about in Abingdon that is just around the corner from the 3rd house on the street that we're buying. So yeah, well done team. Super excited to get cracking on that part of the site, and hopefully practically completing next year. If you did actually join on our open day, we visited the site on both of our last open days. When I say open days, we do like a site tour day for property investors, listeners, mentees, whoever you may be. Make sure you stay tuned to come along to the next one. In actual fact, comment site tour below. We'll save your details and we'll invite you onto this when we're sort of probably nearing finish on the flats and hopefully wind and watertight on the houses. Cool, that's it, I think. That's me over. Another episode done by JJ. Hope I'm not boring you all already. I'm sure we will have Ben back very soon. Obviously, Beck calls and he's got to see to his new child. But what I would love for you all to do is ask questions, because over the next week, we'll be prepping the next agenda for next week. And your questions are really useful, actually, to sort of help us manifest a good agenda that is relevant for all of our listeners. If you're listening on podcast, thank you very much for bearing with me. I know there were some charts on there that probably made it a bit boring for you, but I tried to explain it as best I could. If you do want to see those, obviously this video is going out live on YouTube. And if I could ask any of you that have enjoyed this to please make sure you like, rate us, and also share it with one of your friends that you think might benefit. But until next week, have a good weekend and see you soon.